Good morning from the Sleat Peninsula. Again. Today, I'll be looking for some more quiet places on the Isle of Skye, so I will wander around the Sleat Peninsula. This is the bit that gets all of the ferry traffic, but as far as I can tell, not that many people venture here except when they use the ferry. All of the famous Skye destinations are farther north. I mean, they haven't even put it in the right place on the map. Anyway, there's a nice little loop of single-lane road going to the western shore of the peninsula, and I'm told there's a castle with a sketchy drawbridge. How could I possibly refuse? That is the wrong side of the road. That car doesn't have any EU stickers, so it must be a rental. I'm supposed to be the one having the hard time staying on the left. Peeking through the trees is Loch Ishort on the western side of Sleat.
Any cows? Hey guys. Oh, you're a fluffy one. Yep.
Ord is the name of the hamlet that these cows call home. It's marked on the map, but there aren't but a few cottages. But what a beautiful little beach. And how cool is that sandbar leading out to the rocks? As soon as the farmer appeared, all the cows came running out of the bushes. Clearly, he is the one with the good treats. And then it was my turn. He didn't have any treats for me, though. I've noticed that the sheep who don't see regular traffic are much more bothered by motorbikes than the ones near popular routes. This is Dunscaith Castle. It was built in the 13th century on an older fortified site perched on a giant rock looking out over the sea.
Oh, that's a wee bit sketch.
I was promised a sketchy drawbridge, and Dunscaith Castle has delivered. Trying to hold on to this invisible selfie stick isn't helping either. This castle has been occupied by the MacLeod, MacDonald, and McCaskill clans over the years, until it was abandoned in the 17th century. But legend has it that the great warrior queen, Skahach, lived in this location sometime around 200 BC. It was said that she trained the young warriors who were clever enough to get through her castle defenses, the most notable being Cuchulainn, a folk hero in Irish, Scottish, and Manx mythology, for whom the Cuchulainn was named.
Ah, yes. Now, for the fun part. Get to go back across the sketchy bridge. Check out these dried thistles.
I was much smarter this time and attached the invisible selfie stick to my backpack.
That was a much better idea than what I did before.
I don't know if it's just me, but I enjoy these ruined castles much more than the perfectly maintained ones. And I like how they will often preserve the ruin in its current state to make it safe to explore, instead of rebuilding it.
These forests are so pretty. And so magical looking. Look at that. Like stepping back into another world. All the moss and ferns. So cool.
Down the road are some nice views of the ruins from across the water on a speck on the map called Torabhaig. I just got back on the bike, but I had to stop to take a look.
Break it up, you two.
I don't know what you're talking about. There's nothing going on here. On the right is Loch Gavsgavig. I know, it doesn't look like that. But once you figure out that BH makes a V sound, it makes a little more sense. I'm now entering the village of Talisker, an old crofting community that showed up on the map around 1766. They raised black cattle, sheep, fished, and harvested kelp to process into kelp ash, an alkali used in soap and glass making. There is still lots of kelp here today, but there are other less labor-intensive ways to get alkali now. It's funny to see these iconic red phone booths out in the middle of a field. Logically, they make perfect sense, but my brain associates them with London, so they seem somehow out of place here. This is only a 13.5-mile loop off of the main road on the peninsula, but it feels well removed from the large groups of cars and caravans elsewhere on Skye. And the single-lane roads are delightfully windy, and many of the crests reveal lovely views, like this loch, or a field of cows. These aren't the fluffy ones, though. I stopped at the local distillery Torabhaig for a bite to eat and a distillery tour, but the tours were all sold out for the day. I did find out that there is another seaside castle ruin known as Knock Castle or Castle Chamuis. There is a nice little footpath down behind the distillery. After it passes a little farmhouse, it follows a stream down to the bay. I love how all these castles are just built on top of the biggest rock they could find. There's no sketchy drawbridge, and I didn't find any tales about legendary warrior queens either. It was built in the 15th century and was abandoned 200 or so years later. But I had it all to myself, and I spent some time exploring the tide pools around the base of the castle. A few of them were full of these little red anemones. I can't believe the distillery tours were all full. Come to think of it, I didn't manage to have any whiskey the whole time I was in Scotland. What a travesty. On a positive note, one of the guys working there gave me a tip about a beach to explore that wasn't likely to be crowded.
One new boat and 2 old boats. And a couple other carcasses laying on the beach.
I saw some fishing boats beached at the end of Loch Harport and had to have a look. It's fascinating to see the history of a fisherman's boats all tied up on the beach together. I wonder how many generations this represents. And who is this little guy that I found on the beach? As is traditional, the weather on Skye was constantly changing. It was really nice to have riding gear that is actually waterproof. I've never been fond of putting on rain gear on the side of the road, which often meant that I would wait until it was raining pretty hard before I bothered. I was a little worried that it would be raining at the beach, but it looks like this valley has been spared. Motorized vehicles are not allowed on the road to the beach, so it looks like I'll be hoofing it. The upside is that the mile walk, along with the narrow, windy road, keeps many people away. Well, this looks like as good a spot as any to park. I always appreciate a good gate mechanism, and this one is elegant in its simplicity. After passing a farmhouse, I start to get a glimpse of the beach, walled in by towering cliffs. This is Talisker Bay Beach. With a sea stack on one side and a waterfall blowing off the cliff on the other. And the sand is made up of black and white grains, which allows the water to paint beautiful patterns as it washes over. The locals don't seem terribly fussed by my presence. But it's time to move along and search for some dinner. While riding on the west coast of Scotland, you need to learn to embrace the dead-end roads. There are so many interesting places at the ends of them. The oyster shed was closed today, so I'm happy I went yesterday. This is one of the larger distilleries on Skye, and it shares a name with the beach I just came from. Just down the road, I found dinner at the Old Inn, which proudly proclaims it is probably the best pub in Carboast. It's the only pub in Carboast. They did make a pretty tasty venison burger, though.
Look at that view. It's incredible. All right. I like this way better. Ugh. Yes.
Instead of riding back the way I came, I decided to head across the island on a little B-road to Portree to get some fuel. Besides, I remember Portree being pretty picturesque. You can just see Loch Portree sitting between the small mountains rising from the sea. I quite enjoyed watching the boats in the harbor, but it was far from a tranquil setting. There was definitely more traffic and people than I remember, but the pretty colored buildings were still there.
Holy bejesus. Oh no, what have I done? What have I done? I caught rush hour from Portree. Jeez, jeez. Extra cheese.
Even in a long line of cars, it is pretty cool to ride through these mountains. Portree is definitely not on the list of places to go to avoid crowds. I'm not really sure what I was thinking, and the chunk of island north there is stunning, but quite popular these days, and I had been there on a previous trip. Holy caravan park, Batman. It was a nice change of pace to have a few days here in Skye with no set itinerary. I was able to see places I just found out about from people I met, and I had the time to see what was down little dead-end roads. Like this one. There wasn't anything here except beautiful views of the mountains and a nice little old bridge. This would be my last night on the Isle of Skye, and I was given a dramatic send-off by the soon setting sun. If you're still here, thanks for coming along. And stay tuned for more of the west coast of Scotland and one of the UK's most famous mountain passes.